Between the early 1980s and the late 1990s, an estimated 60 to 104 women were murdered in the Seattle area, making the Green River Killer one of the most prolific serial killers in U.S. history. To understand how a killer operated on this scale for decades, we have to look closely at his first 5 known victims: Wendy Lee Caulfield, Deborah Lynn Bonner, Cynthia Jean Hines, Opal Charmaine Mills, and Marcia Faye Chapman. The killer exploited a sociological concept known as victim availability. He intentionally targeted young women on the margins of society, many of whom were engaged in sex work. The patriarchal culture of the early 1980s viewed these women through a lens of extreme stigma, creating a cultural blind spot where their safety was rarely prioritized. Because society deemed them less visible, their sudden disappearances did not trigger the massive, coordinated alarms that they warranted. This societal indifference provided the killer with perfect camouflage, allowing him to operate in plain sight for nearly 20 years. By November 2001, early advances in DNA technology finally gave the Green River Task Force a suspect, Gary Ridgway. Ridgway vehemently denied the charges. He claimed that while his DNA linked him to 4 of the victims, he was merely a customer, not their murderer. The investigation reached an impasse. Investigators spent 6 months conducting thousands of standard macro-level paint and trace evidence comparisons, looking for anything that would tie Ridgway to the dozens of other unsolved murders. They found 0 associations. Without definitive physical proof tying him to the broader crime spree, the killer remained close to taking his secrets to the grave and escaping full justice. In July 2002, the desperate task force contacted an independent forensic laboratory called Microtrace to completely rethink their approach. The lab made a radical proposal. They suggested abandoning standard visual evidence entirely and searching 2 orders of magnitude smaller. Investigators began the painstaking process of vacuuming microscopic dust deeply embedded within the fibers of the victim's clothing. Hidden within the collected dust were perfectly round microscopic spears of colored spray paint. Uncovering this evidence required scientists to acknowledge their own blind spots and investigate the spaces previously dismissed as too small to matter. This is a graph generated by infrared microspectroscopy, or micro-FTIR. It maps the exact chemical fingerprint of those tiny paint spheres. The deep valleys and peaks you see here identify a very specific substance, a highly specialized pre-1984 paint formulation called Imron. The specificity of Imron was key. It was a high-end product manufactured by DuPont, completely unavailable to the general public. This exclusive chemical linked directly to the Kenworth truck factory in Seattle. That was the exact location where Gary Ridgway had worked as a paint detailer for 32 years. This highly specific, invisible chemical signature irrevocably anchored the suspect to the victims in a way his lies could not dismantle. The forensic team ultimately recovered these exact Imron paint spheres from the clothing of 6 different victims. Armed with this microscopic link, the district attorney officially charged Ridgway with 4 additional murders. Faced with this physical link, Ridgway's defense collapsed. To avoid the death penalty, he confessed to 48 murders. There is a tragic footnote from the forensic scientists who broke the case. The technology existed to find this exact evidence back in 1985, if only they had been asked to examine the victims' clothing then. Justice for the Green River victims was delayed for decades by a society that refused to look closely at marginalized women. It was ultimately achieved only when science brought the invisible, both their human dignity and microscopic truth, into focus.